My name's Vivian Siegel. I am trained as a geneticist and biochemist. I have a PhD in genetics. And I've spent a lot of my life thinking about science and assessing the science that other people do. I currently live in Boston, where I teach at MIT and also partly at Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee. If this could go into the DSM, what might we say? What might we call tumescence for a doctor? So it's the history of somehow believing or internalizing the belief that erotic impulses are inherently bad and therefore you can't act on them. If you did, you might lose affection or status or safety, and then you therefore refuse to respond somehow to that impulse, consciously or unconsciously, to protect yourself from this thing that feels unsafe. And that over time will lead to a bunch of symptoms. And I just named a few as there, from a sense of, a kind of anorexic response, lack of desire, a sublimation response we talked about, a pendulum or erratic response where you go on both sides, an overconsumption, kind of on the opposite side to a deprivation response, or a sense of disgust at the things that will trigger that impulse. So avoiding or being averse to. And then it can have all these other symptoms as like everything other than feeling fully well. And as you can see at the bottom, consider it a form of internalized or culturally induced trauma, in which a natural and powerful drive is considered dangerous and disconnection from self ensues as a protection mechanism. How I tend to think about anything that exists as a phenomenon in our bodies is from the perspective of having trained as a geneticist, where we think about the only power in a biological system, or the only thing that gets selected for by evolution, is the power to productively procreate, right? So you can pass your genes on to the next generation, they can also do that. So any kind of nurturing behavior you have, that's really just to get your offspring up to the level that they can also procreate. Any aggression that you have is to make it more likely that you're going to be the one to be able to procreate. Like it's all procreation. As humans, we don't procreate immediately upon birth. So there's a little bit of having to survive to the stage at which procreation becomes possible. And so if you think of that as the thing that gets selected for by evolution, then there are certain drives that exist in our natures, in our biological selves, that ensure that. Among those is erotic drive, and you've just described it in many ways. And it is in many ways literally the creative force of the universe. If it is the thing that's actually getting you to help create the next generation of humans, then it is that level of creative force. And so there's that drive. There's the drive to sustain your own body. So hunger is one of those primitive drives as well. To breathe, to sustain your body, right? So that you can procreate, right? But those are super powerful forces. And some of those we have recognized there's no reason why we should control them. And others we have tried to control for a variety of reasons. And my guess is there are people in this room that have had experience controlling the drive for hunger, as an example, for physical food, right? And the thing is, when these things are super powerful, maybe you've tried to control your drive to breathe, and there are certain, and as we've experienced for ourselves what happens when we clamp down on a drive and we fail to allow it to be expressed, if that in that sense, for breathing or food or eros, then something happens in our body. So there's an internal phenomenon that happens. Maybe it's not appropriate to express this thing right now, like, or maybe I've been taught culturally I should never express this thing. And so something starts to happen outside that tells the world, like something tells people outside, who tells you there's something, there's some sort of I don't want to use the word illness, but something is reflecting in the outside world that suggests not everything is right with the internal universe of this person. Maybe we could say it that way. There's some disconnection between the natural wellness of the body and everything that the body needs, and something that's happening that's not allowing that body to be fully well. Let's say that. So that's where things like all sorts of symptoms can come up, right? As ways of seeing. So if you went into visit a medical doctor and was like, doctor, I don't know what's wrong with me. It's been a couple of months now, and this is a true story. My lower back's been hurting me, and it just doesn't go away. Like, did you do something? No, I didn't like lift anything too heavy or do anything like that. But it's just starting to. So you try to narrow down, like, what was the thing, if there was a thing that you can point to that actually started leading to these symptoms of not being wholly well, right? And those of us who know Eros, who know that creative energy, might be able to track it back and say, oh yeah, there was this moment I felt rage and I didn't think I could let it out, or I really wanted to go hug this person and I didn't, or like there's something that there was a desire, a natural thing that was happening in our body and we stopped it, right? And often that's where it's like, oh, that's the blocking of expression. And it comes out in a lot of different ways. So excitement and anxiety in the body feel almost identical at the level of sensation, right? If you take the judgment off of it, then it's actually the same experience, right? Just like kind of disgust and turn on are the same sensation in the body. If you take the filter of shame off of it, right?
Yeah.
A key feature of tumescence. There's something that's happening in your body, and like if you interpret it as fear, you would behave in one way, and you would act in a way to try to keep that feeling from happening again, right? And those are all the psychological responses, right? And you would start disconnecting, kind of doing what you can to separate from that sensation. If it's like, oh, I'm excited, you would head towards it. And you might say, ooh, like I'm really excited. This is really getting fluttery, as opposed to I need to back away. And one of the things when I compare it, so I'll compare it to physical hunger, right? So we get a lot of symptoms of hunger. Different people have different symptoms. You might get distracted. You might feel your tummy rumbling. You start yawning. There are lots of things that can happen that can clue you that you're hungry. And if you respond to it and you eat, your body learns that it can trust you. It can actually trust you to pay attention to what it needs. And so it will keep giving you signals. But if you ignore it and you push it away and say, like, I can't act on it now, then eventually the body stops telling you until it screams at you, right? And so you start having exaggerated responses, or you never eat, and then you eat way more than you feel comfortable doing, right? So I think it's like one of those things. It's like you've gotten to a point where you can notice sensation, And there's a relationship between as beings that have free will and can make decisions in terms of how to act, we have that relationship of, do we respond to the messages from our body in a way that we're now working in alignment with it, or do we actually teach our body that we don't have its back, right? Well, if it were breathing, it would just force you, right? It would just get more and more of an alarm and make you breathe. And then there's Eros,
Mm.
which can come out in a lot of ways. If the lessons from the studies on hunger, physical hunger for food, are any indication, it's like, I will entreat all of you, and I'm sure all of you do it anyway, to actually listen to your body, to actually learn to hear the messages of your body and what they're actually asking for, what they're really needing, and act on them, because then your body can trust you, right? Something we didn't bring up initially around Eros itself, which is an energy that involves connection. It often, it is a creative force within us, but it's also, if we think about the drive for procreation and other things, it's within it a drive for a force that flows between and among people, and that sensing that there's that either that, you put out and that requires willingness on both sides, right? Just like in a
Yeah.
gnome, you might say, right? And if you feel like, here I am starting that flow, and then it's being stopped by judgment or criticism or whatever it may be, then there's a recoiling in response. If I'm sensing the symptoms of this now, what feels like a connection blocked, I've recognized a few things that I can do to help that flow again. One is recognizing that has sent me out of my own body, right? Disconnecting me from my body, to actually do practices that connect me back to my body, because that's absolutely critical for an actual genuine connection through the body with another. Um, and then from that may come a willingness to, for want of another thing, be in the present moment. I know me, for whatever reason, I react to someone not liking my lasagna as if they're about to throw a spear into my chest. And I have all the physiological reactions of that. I like it. Okay, they don't like it. Or you could say, well, once that's happened, there's something, for whatever reason, that triggers a traumatic response in my own body. And then I need the tools to heal that trauma. People like Gabor Mate, when he talks about trauma, and others, we'll talk about trauma as trapped energy. What a lot of people say is trauma is energy stuck in the body. Trauma is an experience that happens in your body. It may have been triggered by an external event in your past, but it's not the event itself. It's actually your reaction to it that's creating the trauma response. You have to be able to go, either with a therapist or elsewhere, go in and actually untangle it in your own body. My view of trauma is that we have historically used a walk on eggshells approach to trauma, or a desensitization approach to trauma, which has been, okay, here's this thing that triggers me. You should know not to go there, because I will get triggered as a result. If we go around saying, here are the things that will get me out of flow, and so let me train you to not push me there, right? Another option is to say, let's get that out of the way in my system. The approaches, for the most part to date, have been approaches of getting you to feel less, so that you don't feel as bad. Everyone might know, but I think most drives are similar in that way. Like the moment you like, when if you clamp down on it over and over again, it will either learn to scream loudly enough that you have to react, but it's exaggerated, or you just won't be able to hear it. It will just stop asking. If you say like, I don't know what I want, like that's probably a pretty good indicator that you have silenced those so many times that it's very hard to hear them. But the wonderful thing is that once you start paying attention and you get it's sort of like trusting your body is about your body learning to trust you, right? As much as you trusting it, that as you develop that trust in return, then those signals get more obvious as well. I think a lot of what, why there's so much tumescence in our society is that the erotic messages from our body are intensely shamed, right? And therefore, like there may be some creativity that comes from sublimation. Like, okay, if I can't express it as it wants to be expressed, I can express it this way and become a real, what was it? A great chess player or like, or builder or musician. Like there are just lots of ways you can say, I'm going to take this energy and convert it so that it's not just sitting here, but it's also not expressing, it's not necessarily giving it what it asked for in the first place. I would say tumescence is a form of trauma, that it arises from disconnecting from a natural drive, either because it's culturally inappropriate or for whatever reason, like you disconnect to the point where it becomes trapped in your body and you have it has the same effect as the kinds of trauma we already recognize that, that other kinds of trauma trigger. And so kind of the great news is like, just as we know, there are ways to, and there are things you can do with trapped energy. You can let it like leak out. It can leak out in some really inappropriate ways, right? You can allow it to be channeled into something else, right? Like gardening, as you've said, you can try to drive that, but they'll still probably be in trauma and in tumescence. Might be smaller, but still, I think of it as like a small hard kernel of something that hasn't been fully obliterated in your body. Right? It may not be as big, but it's still there. Om is an amazing thing to do that, right? Because it is now, it's one of the kind of forces that then is, you might argue, is powerful enough to actually move it through